Good morning. Thank you very much. My name is Kevin MacDonald. I'm a Professor of Sociology here at Middlesex University and head of the Department of Criminology and Sociology. And I'd very much like to welcome you here on behalf of the University and the School of Law, which is hosting the event, and more specifically the Urban Neighbourhood Research Unit, a new research unit that's been created in the Department of Criminology and Sociology that's actually behind the day itself. We've got, I think, a quite ambitious title for the day's work. It's called A New Direction on the issue of London street gangs. It's an ambitious one. It's ambitious because of the term a new direction, and it's also ambitious because of the question mark associated with it. The term gang itself is a quite disputed term, as many of us would know, and there's a lot of debate about how adequate it is as a description, how adequate it is as a term of analysis, and how adequate it is to guide policy. It's a very old term. Many of us would know it pops up in Mark Twain's Huckleberry Finn when Tom Sawyer creates a gang. That's published in 1884, and Mark Twain describes, the writer describes a rite of initiation where everybody, Tom Sawyer's friends, swear an oath of loyalty to join this group. And in the process they create a secret world. It's their space that they're going to be loyal to and they're prepared to defend at all costs. Sociologists later, I'm a professional sociologist, sociologists, academics use the term largely since the 1920s when gangs emerged in large cities, in particular marked by a very important book published in the 20s by Frederick Fasher called Gangs in Chicago. It focused on gangs emerging in cities, and Thrasher argues these were gangs and forms of social organisation emerging with people essentially who are immigrants to the city, either from other countries or from rural areas. And he argued that they created forms of structure in worlds that in some ways were in period processes of flux, and to use his word at the time, fragmented and uprooted. And in a sense, some of these ideas remain in the way professional sociologists and criminologists and other academics use the term today. Gangs, whatever they are, in some ways turn disorder into order. And they do so by some sort of relationship to place, through controlling some sort of territory or a neighbourhood. And in that sense, most people who use the term in any way at all are referring to two sorts of things going on. Some sort of process of turning disorder into structure, order, and another doing that through control of the territory and relationships of competition. In that sense, many academics working on gangs argue that you'll never have one gang, you'll need more. And there is a relationship of competition between each other. And those two things, external conflict, internal loyalty, reinforcing each other. And to the extent that is still used today, that's highlighting, if you like, transition sorts of processes going on. In today's world, of course, that's very much linked to experiences of danger and unpredictability being turned into spaces of safety, experiences of disrespect, or a lack of sense of self and agency being turned into experiences of recognition, respect, and perhaps a very great sensitivity to the regard of others being turned not only into the search for recognition, but also power, pleasure, and many times violence. Now, today's event brings together key people to focus on this urgent question. The way what Huckleberry Finn and his friends 150 years ago now, as a group of friends, is in some way mutating into forms of violence, and very much connected with contemporary forms of crime, leading to very serious consequences for very many people, including tragic loss of life that we're all aware of. Integrated also into other networks of crime, from trafficking of people, trafficking of drugs, and other forms of associated crime. At the same time, gangs do highlight social and cultural processes, forms of self-organisation amongst young people, quite surprising forms of entrepreneurialism, significant attachment to neighbourhood and place. And open up the question, what way can those sorts of impulses, those sorts of creative directions, be turned to other purposes? Earlier on this year, the Department of Criminology created an urban neighbourhood research unit, and that's linked to the vision of the university behind today's session and work. It's a model of the university not just involved in discussion amongst academics, but as a space of partnership and exchange, where theory and ideas meet policy and practice and experience, and where the two of them interact and reinforce each other and in a sense deepen each other together. In that sense, we as academics and researchers hosting today's event are very much aware of the critical role this type of event plays, both for what gives us, but also hopefully what research and scholarship can offer practitioners and policymakers. And also many of the people directly involved in this world. Today's a very significant mix of people here, and on behalf of the university and the centre, I'd very much like to thank the people who've come today to give up time from very busy schedules to participate, and also, as you'll see from the quality of our speakers, people who have very many demands on their time, and their time is very precious. So they've given up that time to come here for the type of exchange that we can have, bringing together policymakers, academics, people working in central government, London boroughs, MOPAC, policing, the probation services, a key range of associations and organisations, health sector, youth workers, educators, people linked to families, key associations and neighbourhood groups, youth workers, and also an important number of young people themselves. Here will be sharing their own experiences. So it's a great opportunity today to exchange ideas, experiences, to network, and that's very much what we hope today's culture, the structure, if you like, of the day will be. Not just sitting here and listening, but exchanging both informal sessions and informal sessions that we've organised. What we've distributed, and most of you should now have, is a pack, which have got some of the key material of different presentations that are going on. And then on the little booklet we've got here, on the third page, we've got the actual structure of the day. As you can see, it's organised around key sessions in the morning in this room here, and then that will be followed in the afternoon by a number of workshops that will be held in this building, but in that section there. You'll be able to go up and through. We've got time for networking in the morning over a coffee break, which will be up in the mezzanine, where most of us were just before coming down here. And at lunchtime, we're having lunch in the Grove building. We'll go over there together, and as we get closer to it, we'll explain more how to get there. That's linked to an exhibition by a very productive and creative photographer, Simon Wheatley, called Don't Call Me Urban. So the program, in that sense, brings together both opportunities for interaction, very important people shaping the Gangs agenda, who have given up of their time to speak to us this morning, and then key practitioners in different areas undertaking workshops in the afternoon. So we're looking forward to a very productive day, one that we hope is going to have a real impact, both at the level of ideas, at the level of policy and practice, and ultimately it's going to be a day that will have an impact in the lives of young people in the city of London. So on behalf of the university, thank you very much for coming, and I'll pass over now to Kurt Barling, who's going to speak more about today itself and his work. Thank you.
Morning, everyone. Come on, we can do better than that. It's the morning, we're bright, we're ready. Good morning, everyone.
Good morning.
Of course, we heard from Kevin, who had this enduring fascination with gangs, gang culture, gang lifestyle. Sometimes it feels like another American import. Often sitting in my study at home, I'm hearing these kind of weird sounds coming from my son's bedroom with his Xbox which seems to have a whole plethora of games which use gangs as their theme and somehow try and glamorise it. Newspapers are full of it. As a journalist for the BBC for nearly a quarter of a century, I was involved in making many films about gang life, gang culture, gang deaths in London. I'll show one of those films very briefly in a moment. Movie goers, of course, love it too, don't they? But of course, we know, if you scratch below the surface, you'll find it's a very complicated outcome of urban living, made even more complicated in our city by the complexity of our multicultural city. Some of the themes which are in Simon Harding's latest book. Of course, the reality, as we know, is often brutal and a brutish business, with a lot of death, a lot of trauma, and a huge diversion of resources resulting from this enduring and some might say entrenched problem. I made the film that we're going to see in a moment last year whilst the Home Office was conducting its review of gangs, and following it we'll have our speakers, first from the Home Office, then from the MOPAC, from the Mayor's Office, then from the Met Police, to give an indication of where we got them to since that review. Then after that we'll hear from Simon on his new research, talking a bit about street capital. We'll also get some visual stimulation over lunch when we're over in the Grove with Don't Call Me Urban, Simon Wheatley's photographic exposition, which is well worth having a good look at. Today, of course, is a chance, as Kevin has said, for practitioners or at the delivery end of gangs intervention to share views, but also to refresh your thinking. Quite often in the past when I've introduced myself, I've followed an academic and I said, of course, I'm not an academic, I operate in the real world, I'm a journalist. Of course, I no longer have that luxury because I am, of course, a professor here at Middlesex, so I straddle both domains. But it's indicative in my own work how it's very easy to get trapped in a silo. You know, the silo of probation, the silo of policing, the silo of prison, the silo of street youth work, social services, mental health care, all which are desperately important. But in order to get a sense of these individual gang members, you all know that each one will respond to different things. A one-size-all-fits-all approach does not work. So this is a chance, as Kevin said, to reconsider the risks associated with your particular approach or your particular department gaining ascendancy in a field where remedies need a long timeline and multidisciplinary expertise to tackle the problem. In particular, I urge you this afternoon to step outside your comfort zone during the knowledge transfer workshops to experience material that you may be either less familiar with or in your daily work as practitioners who some other people's work you might not quite understand, whilst you're busy trying to keep a lid on the crises you're all trying to deal with. It's a university environment. Ask questions, test ideas, find remedies. That's the purpose of this forum. That's obviously the purpose of today. A chance, of course, to foster a conversation between sometimes silent partners. And I speak from experience there as a long-standing BBC correspondent. Very often you talk to one party involved in this very difficult area and they don't talk to other parties as often as they should. Today is a good time to do that. Hopefully you'll leave with fresh insights, fresh professional partnerships, new friendships even, because in the end we all work better when we like what the other party is doing, all to tackle a gang culture that is blighting the lives of far too many people in London. Before I hand over to Jenny Oklika from the Home Office, a short film, I just want to remind speakers this morning, you'll see on the schedule you have 20 minutes. That means about 16 minutes to talk and 4 minutes for Q&A. I'm a ruthless chair. If you don't keep to time, I will invoke a higher authority.
all London boroughs are affected by gang violence, which can erupt, especially when someone strays into the wrong area. For some young people, the difference between life and death can rest on a postcode. Now, a review by the Home Office is looking at how best to tackle the issue. Our special correspondent Kurt Barling looks at one project which moves gang members away from their home turf to try and keep them out of trouble.
These are the moments at a South London school gate in 2010 when 15-year-old Zach Olumegdon was stabbed to death, a victim of gang-related youth violence. 4 teenagers were later found guilty of his murder. This teenager wasn't involved in that incident. His gang allegiances, though, means he's only agreed to talk with me on condition of anonymity for fear of reprisals.
We'll have issues with another area, then it just turned out to a school fighting another school. Then from then, it just turned out to a gang. We just used to go around fighting. We'll be outside the bus stop, someone will come off a bus that goes to a certain school that we don't like, we'll go around fighting them. Then it all started there, then we became popular and people used to fear us.
Fear breeds violence, and according to those at the heart of the government's strategic review of gangs, triggered by the 2011 riots, levels of violence are often underreported.
We constantly get these statistics presented to us suggesting that crime is going down and that the situation is being managed, when in fact what the community is saying is that the reporting may have reduced, but the actual violence on the street is increasing.
Murders and convictions we hear about. CCTV sometimes catches the perpetrators. Experts broadly agree that the spiral of violence is sucking in ever younger victims.
It's getting a lot worse. People around us was dying from a young age. We would have equipment that many people wonder how did we even get hold of at that age. So definitely, yeah, like equipment, maybe firearms, knives, all of these types of stuff.
The government's review has been led by people who work with gang members at street level and looked at 18 hotspots for gangs in London where urgent intervention is needed. Getting youngsters out of gangs is the priority, and Southwark Council's Gang Intervention Unit has spearheaded work in this area.
The figures that will tell you about a young person or losing their life to gun or knife crime is calculated around about £1.5 million in terms of the criminal justice system, healthcare, etc. Do we really think that actually finding someone some work, moving them into some formal education or employment, employing some mentors to also provide that service is going to cost us a lot more than that?
Some unexpected revelations have also come from this year-long review. It's not just about law and order, but also the risks of long-term psychological damage.
Trauma is a big problem, but so is mental health generally. So 1 in 3 young people who offend have an unmet mental health need at the time of offence. And we're seeing trauma, we're seeing clinical depression, we're seeing particularly with 19 and 20-year-old males, young people that are beginning to show signs of an early psychotic illness. And we're also witnessing any combination of those difficulties.
This is the Southwark team, including ex-gang members, who identify those who are most vulnerable and at greatest risk, and then rehouse them away from their home turf.
What we have to make sure we do more of is go out and provide those opportunities, make sure people know that they are there, help them along that journey. We have to have some form of enforcement, because there are some people that, to change their lives, they need to know there is a position where we will not go beyond. That has to be in place.
No one forced this young man into a gang, but he now believes the only way to start a new life is away from old haunts. A life or death choice.
I think 2 of my friends got guilty for murder, so they got 30 years, and I was thinking, I don't want to be in jail. This could have easily been me. We do the same thing. I could be in jail for 30 years as well, or I could be dead like my friend, and I don't want to be in that position.
Well, I mean, it puts in perspective the life and death issues, but also the multidisciplinarity of the response that is needed to it. And I ask Jenny O'Clicker from the Home Office to come up and give our first presentation. Thanks.
I'll get started whilst we get the IT in place. Just like to thank you for the introduction, Kurt, and thank you to Simon and to Middlesex University for inviting me here today. I'm really grateful for the opportunity to participate in this event and welcome Simon's research on this issue. I think we need to build our evidence base, we need to build what we know about the issue of gangs and youth violence, and I think that makes an important contribution. I've been leading work for the Home Office in this area since 2011, and I know many of you in the room, I don't know all of you, so I was at the Home Office and oversaw the development and production of the Ending Gang Youth Violence report and programme. It's really important to say that that was delivered very much in collaboration, including with a number of you in the room, certainly with the speakers that you saw in the BBC clip. And what I intend to do today is give you an overview, if I can squeeze it into my 16 minutes, of what we've been doing over the last 3 years and some of the learning from that. What I won't be telling you to do, particularly local partners and local practitioners, is how to do your jobs. Very much recognise that you are the people who know your communities best and know your local challenges best. The role of the programme and the role of my team, and it's very much a cross-government programme, is really to support local areas with their key issues and challenges, and those issues and challenges that they identify. Okay, let's get started. So I'm going to give some brief background information about where we were when we wrote the Ending Gang Youth Violence report, and some of the kind of factors that underpinned our thinking at that time, 2011. And first, maybe this is a graph that will be familiar to some of you from Professor Mark Bellis, which basically shows very graphically that if you are a young man, you are from a deprived area, you are 3.5 times more likely to be a victim of violence than your more affluent counterparts, male counterparts. We also know that there is a big overlap between young people who are victims of crime and who are perpetrators when we look at gangs, and MOPAC are doing some important work in this area as part of their strategy. And we also stated in that report that the majority of young people are not involved in crime, are not involved in violence. And that might seem like stating the obvious, but I think it's really important to say, to put this in context. However, what we do have, and as you all know, is a small number of young people who have a disproportionate and significant impact on the specific communities in which they live. The other thing that we did at that time is look at the life cycle of a young person, potentially, who's maybe involved in gangs. And we created a character called Boy X. And we looked at the kind of risk factors that Boy X may have in his life. So issues around lack of presence of parenting, violence in the home, parental substance misuse, being an early victim of crime themselves, mental health issues both in the home and in early life of that child, early offending, etc. And then also looked at the range of agencies that have involvement with that individual, because the idea, our analysis was there are a number of points at which agencies can intervene with a young person from a very early age and identify some of these warning signs. And as Kurt rightly said, this is about all agencies joining up. So whether they're youth justice, even before that, social services, schools, housing, etc., all have a role to play. And these factors very much underpin the government's, the new approach and the reports. So very much an ambitious and wide-ranging strategy. We talked to lots of people at the time. We talked to young people, we talked to voluntary sector people, statutory sector people, and others in terms of developing the work. Since 2011, we've had 2 further reports which have set out progress and further commitments. The government is very keen that this is very much in the public domain and that we're very open about what is being delivered and what the priorities are. Some of the key messages in the report from early on were this is about changing the way mainstream services do business. It's not necessarily about creating new things, it's about bringing existing services and information together that often sit separately. The importance of identifying young people at risk from early childhood. And obviously we weren't starting from scratch. We were building on, if you've been in this area for a while, the Tackling Knives Action Programme, as well as the Communities Against Guns, Gangs and Knives Programme, and the work and the relationships that have been built under that. We identified a kind of cross-cutting framework, which came under sort of 5 headings, all begin with P. Very briefly, providing support to local areas. Really important to say that that is practical and peer-led. So the question that I would get from ministers is, what difference is the programme making on the ground? So what? What are we doing with the programme on the ground? What difference is it making to local areas? Very much the focus of our support and work with local areas. Very much a genuine partnership. Recognise this as a multi-agency problem locally. The programme is a cross-government programme, DWP, sorry, I'll start using acronyms, but you know, health, education, communities and local government, all very much involved in the programme. Much bigger focus on prevention than previously, and I'll come to that. Also the importance of recognising that some people would like to exit a gang lifestyle, and how can we work with local areas to enable them to do that, and more effective enforcement where that's needed. So in the first year of the programme, 12-13, we worked with 33 London areas, 20 of whom are in London. We set up a frontline team headed by Mick McNally, who came from the Met. Many of you will know Mick. And we set up something called a peer review network, and I can't stress how important this network is. We work with around 80 people, frontline practitioners, including people like Jonathan Toy and Charlie Olcock and Vivian Moon, who you saw in the piece there, who have a range of backgrounds. So yes, policing and criminal justice, but also safeguarding, education, health, community engagement. And they came together in small teams and went along to the areas that we were working with, the 33 areas, and helped them identify what their strengths are, where their areas for development are, and what the kind of local good practice is. We did a review of our, 10 minutes. Better crack on. We did a review of the first year of the programme, and in a nutshell, and our analysts did it, so I didn't do it as a policy lead, and they said they welcomed, as a result of the programme, they had more effective leadership, they were prioritising gang youth violence much more, they felt they were able to drive and shape this programme more so than previous Home Office programmes, they liked the peer review approach, and they were getting to grips more with some of the practical challenges, particularly health, working with the voluntary community sector, engaging Job Centre Plus, big push on that under this programme, and issues around girls and gangs. So where are we now? I will crack on and just talk about some of the key issues that we're currently focusing on. And I think it's important to point out that this work is a really good example where obviously the policy has shaped what we do locally, but then the experience locally has shaped policy. So So we should be, as you know, we're continually striving to be up to date with what are the issues that are coming out locally and what can we do about that nationally if we need to do something nationally. I will skip over this. These are some of the areas of work we're currently working with local areas on. So much more in-depth support around particular issues, and I'll basically come on to this in much more detail now. So, although there's been a lot of progress, we're still working with local areas on what I call getting the basics right. So just ensuring you know who your gang, you know who your gang nominals are, you know who are the most dangerous. You're getting that information not just from police sources, but a range of other sources. You have a system around referring people into the appropriate services. Continuing to do a lot of work around health and increasing knowledge around the impact of mental health, particularly on driving violent behaviour. One of the things that came out as well from the peer reviews, work we did in year one, was local authorities, police and others saying, how do we better engage with our communities? And we've had people like Viv Moon working with local areas to help them, or working with local agencies to help them better engage their communities and better engage statutory, VCS services. Early intervention. We are from this year doing a really good piece of work with the Early Intervention Foundation, which has been recently set up, following the work that Graham Allen MP did in this area. That will include, they have 20 pioneering places where they're going to work around early intervention, 5 of which are going to be our ending gang youth violence areas. We've had expression of interest process running at the moment, and I think that's will be a really good piece of work around what works in terms of early intervention and enabling areas to make the case financially for investing in early intervention. They'll help us look at how you can better identify vulnerable individuals, and they're also setting up a website. They have a website at the moment that's worth looking at, and they're going to build that around resources on gangs and youth violence. Prevention and routes out, really important. So just to flag up a few of the kind of things that we're doing in terms of engaging as many young people, communities, families, and practitioners and professionals as possible. NSPCC helpline. Who's heard of the NSPCC helpline for gangs? Hands up, please. That's quite good actually. That's really good. That was launched last month. And is for primarily adults who are concerned about a young person in their area. We've provided training to Fire Safe London Foundation for NSPCC helpline practitioners, so they have information on gangs and can respond to that. Wow, 5 minutes. When people call. Department for Work and Pensions have been very much behind this programme. Job Centre Plus taking active roles. So, for example, there are specialist gangs advisors in job centres in London, and I think rolled out in other parts of the country. Over 1,100 young people through that scheme being helped into education, training and work. And we're working with Crime Stoppers to on their anti-knife campaign. I'll go through this very quickly. A lot of young people don't understand joint enterprise, and so we produced, building on some of the work police have done, an awareness pack, which is available. The government announced recently that it will be funding a Centre of Excellence for Information Sharing. Information sharing, I won't need to tell you, if you're involved in this area, it's absolutely crucial in terms of identifying those who are vulnerable, those who are at harm to themselves and at a risk to others. There is a new Information Sharing Centre of Excellence. We're working with them, our frontline team is working with them to work with some local areas about giving advice to those local areas on information sharing. And that will go nationally live from mid-2015 and is intended to be the first port of call for advice on information sharing. I think this is a big step forward. Just in a few seconds that I've got left. Can I ask a question? So who thinks we need, okay, there's two forms of debate on information sharing. People think the legislation is in place, people are just too risk averse, and culturally we need to change what we do, and people think actually we need to change the legislation. Can I ask can I ask you to put your hands up if you think we've got the legislation, but it's how we use it on information sharing? Just over half. How many people think we need new legislation? Much smaller. And how many people that don't knows? So I can take you out if you don't knows. Right, okay, so that's really helpful. There is a piece of work looking at opportunities for new legislation, actually whether we do need it. And if you have any views on that, please let me know. But otherwise, I think we're kind of in the space of actually how can you change culture around information sharing. So, how long do I have, Kurt? 2 minutes. Violence and public health, really important. If I say one thing, if you haven't already read Protecting People, Promoting Health by Mark Bellis, which really sets out the public health analysis of violence and how it spreads and how you can intervene with violence, I would encourage you to do that. We're working with Public Health England and NHS England on raising awareness, information sharing, that kind of thing. Really important, gang-associated women and girls. As you'll know, they are at greater risk of violence by that association. We know a lot more than we did before as a result of Bedfordshire University's work and Office of Children's Commissioner work. And what we want to do is help increase reporting, improve targeting and the quality of interventions, and reduce victimisation. Here we have our Minister meeting some workers and one of our young people's advocates who we introduced as specialist practitioners to provide advice and casework and raise a profile of these issues. We've also done work with people like the British Association for Sexual Health and HIV around advice for sexual health workers, because as we know, if you're a young woman and you're sexually exploited by a gang, you're not unlikely to. The evidence is reported to the police. So let's raise awareness amongst those services that are aware. I am fabulously over time or under time. I was going to talk to you a bit about the criminal justice response and the top lines here: better coordination, tackling issues like violence in prisons, information sharing that we now have in place between National Offender Management Service and police and prisons. So when gang members go into the prison or YOIs, those workers in that prison know that they're gang affiliated in a way that they didn't before. Lastly to say, around links to organised crime and radicalisation, many of you will be familiar with the term county lines, and this is around gang members who move across the country to deal drugs elsewhere, something that we need to get on top of much more. We've done some really good work with some South East London boroughs. There is a county lines toolkit to help you identify those issues, which I would encourage you to take a look at. Radicalisation. Can I appeal to the high authority and make a couple of more points? Thank you. Radicalisation, just to say, the links between street gangs and radicalisation and extremism likely to be small, but I think as a minimum, if you're working in local areas and you're a gangs lead, speak to your CT, counter-terrorism, prevent and channel people, look at your intelligence. So if you are involved in that world and you have a counter-terrorism local profile, ask the questions around, look at gang members as well. There's something called RAP training, which is about building awareness of radicalisation issues, RAP, W-R-A-P. There will be people trained in every area to deliver this. Have that training, it's really quick and easy. And just to say very quickly, lastly, challenges ahead. We know overall violence is down, some of which is underreported, but overall violence is down. However, there remains a number of challenges. The issue that was raised earlier, gangs are changing, areas report, less visible presence. More organised criminality, we need to ensure that we're gripping that and we're on top of that. Interesting reporting around, so not just involved in robbery, violence, drugs, sexual violence, but also moving into fraud, burglary. We need to ensure that we're on top of that as well. So lastly, and also exploitation of vulnerable young people that many areas are seeing, where gangs are using vulnerable young people. They might be looked after children, they might be missing children, to undertake drug dealing activities, and it's exploitation, and it's a real safeguarding issue. So finally, just to say, a lot achieved, certainly not complacent, and looking forward to working with partners on an ongoing basis on this important one.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Why don't we take one or two questions so we can get on to the next speaker. One or two questions, not statements, please, if you have them from the audience. If not, we'll press on. Maybe we can ask questions over coffee. We'll press on and ask questions over coffee. Very interesting talk. Clearly indicates that the government is aware of the multidisciplinarity of this issue. Be interesting to get a response a bit later on the feedback mechanism and how well that works. I read in my local paper last week that gang nominals have been taken out of the equation, and as a consequence there's a free-for-all. So that feedback, how quickly can be fed up and how quickly can the government react with its resource allocation? That's a question for later perhaps. Next. Marie Snelling from the Mayor's Office for London is going to tell us what the Mayor is, the Mayor's Office is trying to do to get on top of the problem, which, as you recall from that graphic at the very beginning, where London has 20 of the 33 areas which are targeted in that review process, because London has a particular problem beyond all others around the country.
Thank you very much indeed, and thank you very much for having us here this morning and for inviting me to speak. I'm going to be getting the kind of the signs as Jenny did, so I need to be as brief as I possibly can. But I guess my piece this morning is to give you a bit of an overview of what's happening in London through the London Crime Reduction Board that the Mayor chairs in relation to gangs and serious youth violence. And most importantly, I'm going to focus on the Strategic Ambitions document for gangs and serious youth violence that we launched in June, which I think takes us a big step on, awful lot still to do, but just to give you a flavour of that and what that means for London. I know that Damien Allen is joining us afterwards from the Met, who will give you all sorts of insights, I'm sure, into kind of some of the stats and figures. I'll cover a few in mine, but I'm sure some of those detailed questions will be picked up by him. So I'm Marie Snelling. I'm the Director for Integrated Offender Management, Programmes and Neighbourhoods, longest title in the world, at the Mayor's Office for Police and Crime. In relation to this morning, I have the lead for the Mayor's Office around gangs and serious youth violence, along with a range of other mayoral policy priority areas. A little bit of history. Sorry, I don't know what's happened to the text here. We had a slight challenge with my presentation this morning, so I'm sorry about that. I'm sure it will be circulated after we come back. Just a little bit of history then. We've been working on this agenda for some time, and so many people in the room, I recognise numerous faces, which is always nice to see as well, have been part of that journey. So the London Crime Reduction Board, chaired by the Mayor of London in his role as the Police and Crime Commissioner for London, commissioned the first partnership strategy around anti-gang strategy back in 2012, and then committed to refreshing that in 2013. And that first strategy, and I think the reason I'm saying this is because it created really a kind of a platform for working together across agencies in London, as has been alluded to by the presenters already this morning, being really, really important. There were a number of key achievements under that strategy. I've highlighted just a few here. They're a little bit wordy. Let me give you kind of some of the top lines. We have invested through what we call the London Crime Prevention Fund that came to us from the Home Office, along with London boroughs, around £3 million going into local areas for gang and serious youth violence projects. a really good success. We've been working really closely with the Crown Prosecution Service. We now have specialist gang prosecutors, which I think is a fantastic step forward in terms of being able to respond from the criminal justice end, as Jenny was saying, in relation to gangs. We have pieces around community impact statements that have been agreed, and the way in which we do those between both the community and indeed in the secure estate. There's some fantastic work going on that lots of you will know about, including via Trident, who are operating in ISIS, and a lot of those, the prison impact statement work that has recently come out. There's also some work around that we've done around mental health. There are a number of pilots around child and adolescent mental health that were done, and indeed under that first strategy, a Girls and Gangs strategic framework that was published online. So in my mind, there was a whole set of kind of joint working that was done, and a number of things that were done between 2012 sort of 2013. But I guess then a whole set of partners, including ourselves, said, right guys, we've got to ramp this up now. Been done some really interesting stuff, but actually we need to be thinking about where we go next. So in terms of refreshing the strategy then, the Gangs panel was established in 2013, chaired by the Deputy Mayor for Policing and Crime, and involves a wide range of organisations and individuals, some of which will be represented in this room. Importantly, to inform the refresh of the strategy, we led a comprehensive consultation. I recognise lots of people in this room who came to some of those events. We touched over 320 organisations, individuals, through an online survey, through face-to-face consultation events, and indeed through reviewing our literature and having conversations. I was lucky enough to run a number of those. I ran one in City Hall for about 70 voluntary and community sector organisations, and my favourite was the one that we ran with young people and gang members themselves who came in for pizza. So quite frankly, that was the best one in terms of capturing kind of people's views. And that was about having a big conversation about where next. We've done some really good stuff together. Where do we need to focus given the challenge in London? And what came out of that was the strategic ambitions for serious youth violence and gangs, which we launched at an international summit, which many of you will have attended on the 2nd of June of this year, which was hosted by the Mayor and the Deputy Mayor, and brought people together from around the world to be thinking about this challenge, and indeed to celebrate what we've achieved and what we want to do in relation to this agenda from partners across London. Just a very brief piece. I will just kind of give a couple of stats here. I know Damien will go into far more detail than I will do, but I think this sort of frames up, and people talk today about a little bit already about data and intelligence and really starting to understand what's going on. On a London level, from a Trident perspective, and this is only from the Trident data, and I'll come on to how we're trying to broaden that picture out. There are a number of about 3,495 individuals, gang members, and they're associated with around 224 known gangs. The majority of those, as you will see, are aged between 17 and 23 years of age, and the vast majority of those have had a previous sanction. Thank you very much for my 10-minute warning. 61% there of gang members have been a victim of any crime. That to us is really, really important. Jenny touched on it. It's a big thing for us. In a different part of my role, I will have from about 2 weeks' time responsibility for victims commissioning for London. The overlap between victims and offenders in this area is significant. And if you have the joy of reading our Gangs and Serious Youth Violence document, please do. It's a jolly good read. It's available online. I'm sure we can circulate it as well. There's some really interesting case studies in there around victimisation in terms of gang offenders. And so one of our key things through the consultation that came out, and in terms of our thinking from the Mayor's office, is that we cannot just tackle the offending behaviour for this group. We also need to be tackling victimisation alongside that. And then the last point there around a number of females and males being identified as victims of sexual violence, and I'm sure that's something that will be talked about more this afternoon. I was yesterday with the London Safeguarding Children's Board, where we were talking about child sexual exploitation more broadly, but also in relation to gangs, and particularly with relation to girls and gangs and how we respond to that. It's a critical issue, it's a real challenge for us. Just a brief piece, sorry, I don't quite know what's happened at the bottom there, just a brief piece to say in relation to sort of gang activity in London, it has changed. It's changed in a small period of time. You'll see that arrow in the middle there, that's in relation to gang flagged crimes, as according to the MPS, the Metropolitan Police Service, have gone down over a 2-year period. And that has significantly reduced. However, we also know, as people have said in the room, that the challenge is changing. It's changing significantly. And some of these beautiful maps, which we can share at a later date, are starting to say actually geographically the situation is changing. So actually we're starting to see activity in the outer London boroughs. I've been out with a number of those over the last few months, talking to them about how they start to get on the front foot of that. So this is no longer just an inner London problem. And indeed, yesterday I was looking at some of the data, and we talked, Jenny's alluded to the whole county lines piece. We've been doing some really good work, bringing partners together from an enforcement perspective, from a police and crime commissioner perspective, and from other agencies to really look at that issue around Kent, Sussex, Surrey, Essex, of what's happening across borders. So we're no longer also talking about this being just within a London context. We have to be thinking about this across borders as well. Yesterday, just as a key fact, and this kind of comes to our point of we need to continue to update the picture and link together our intelligence sets, I was looking at some data that was matching those gang members who are on the matrix from the Metropolitan Police Service and the data that they have around young people going missing. Very interesting picture when you start to overlay some of those things. A number of those people coincide, and there were a significant number in there that actually had gone missing over 30 times. You start then to ask significant questions about what is going on there, and we know some of the hypotheses, but we need to start to get underneath that. Very briefly then, in terms of the overarching strategy, many of you will know this, but there were 3 key themes that came very clearly out as focus points for the refresh strategy for London. Our overarching aim being about reducing harm. The 3 key objectives are set out there: prevention, intervention, enforcement, and those being underpinned by strong leadership across London, coordination, collaboration, and indeed performance and governance. Just a brief little bit about each of those 3. In relation to prevention, our focus there is about ensuring that children and young people avoid gangs involvements, and a focus particularly around how do we put in place prevention programmes, particularly in our schools. We've been working with a number of head teachers to think about how we do that in order to prevent young people from moving into gangs in the first place. It was massive in terms of the consultation of people saying, come on, you know, we've done some really good work around enforcement, that has to continue, but actually we've really got to get to grips on the prevention side. On the intervention side, our focus there is very much about gang exit, both for those coming out of custody, but also for those that want to exit who are in the community. Those of you that were at the summit on the 2nd of June and have heard the Mayor speak on this, he talks about London as being, this is a city of opportunity, and we have so many opportunities for young people. We should be driving those ambitions, and we should be supporting those who want to exit gang activity to be able to move on and to achieve their aspiration and ambition. To do that, we need to put the right things in place, and I think we all recognise that actually we didn't have consistency or quality provision to be able to support young people to exit gang activity. That includes things like employment support, it includes things like housing opportunities, mentoring, etc. Also, within that intervention piece is the whole piece around support for victims and indeed the piece around mental health. You saw Charlie Alcock on the video, I'm sure lots of you know her. As Jenny said, she's been working with her. We also have, and with a number of other organisations. Mental health was one of the biggest themes that came out of the consultation, and we absolutely want to look at how we tackle that in terms of core interventions for these young people. And then thirdly, the enforcement piece is all about how do we ensure that we continue to put resources into this from an enforcement perspective. We can't take our eye off the ball on that side. Jonathan Toy talked about that in the video in terms of saying actually there has to be consequence as well as opportunity to exit. But it also means a slight shift in focus, not only on the London, but really to think about this county lines challenge, and we have to be able to put enforcement in across geographies. Very quickly then, just the sort of the last slide about where next. Many of you will know and love what happens after you launch a new strategy or you do an event. Is everyone goes, oh, thank God for that, I've done that. Here's the document, right. And it's about 6 months until anything happens and someone goes, hang on a second, what are we actually doing with this and how are we going to deliver? I think what's been really, really positive and really powerful across partners in London was a real willingness to say, come on, we've got to get on with this now. And I've just highlighted here just a couple of things that we've done even since June. It's only September. I think it's pretty impressive. The first thing that we've done is to secure money from the Ministry of Justice's Victims Competed Fund, where we're going to be putting in specialist youth support into the 4 major London trauma centres. Some of you will know about this work that's currently being piloted via King's and being delivered via Red Thread. What we've put in is some money to be able to expand that across London. That means that young people going in, and I was out at King's yesterday with a gang member who had been stabbed in his backside, and talking about the specialist youth provision that can go in at that point to be able to support those young people that are presenting. We've also secured a set of money via the Police Innovation Fund to support that gang's mental health element, and that's about how do we support mental health and safeguarding training for frontline workers to be able to identify and to better support at the front line from a mental health perspective. And then thirdly, we've got an event next week that we are hosting with London First, which is talking to big business and big enterprise around how can they as a business community better support us in London, and particularly around the elements around employment in relation to gangs. So there is an awful lot going on within this space, and I think there's a huge set of ambitions, and thank you to those people in the room who have been part of both developing the strategy, and I know who will be committed to helping us to deliver it. And I think we have, absolute confidence through that continued partnership working and that continued focus from the Mayor and from partners across London that we can really make a difference in this agenda. So thank you very much.
No need for the higher authority to be voted there. Marvellous. Quite interesting, those of you recall some of the work I did on the BBC when the Mayor came to power, and there was a lot of talk about gangs and the need for gang intervention. I recall, if I'm not mistaken, having a few cross words to say about the gangs approach of the Mayor's office. I think it got me into trouble on occasions with the Mayor's office. What's interesting is that it's clear that the questions are being reframed. I mean, here you've clearly recognised the policing issues, but beyond that, these questions of how young people are getting trapped in a lifestyle, how does London coordinate, particularly with those outer reaches, Hampshire, Berkshire, Northamptonshire, Suffolk even, affected by our gang activity. That's interesting that now you're taking on board those issues, and of course stopping young people getting into gangs and finding exit strategies. And Charlie Alcock, of course, is now Charlie Howard, now she's married, but that kind of work, looking at trauma and mental health, the fact that you're actually putting your money where your mouth is, shows there is a big shift. I won't take questions here because I want to get Damon up here, if he's here. I don't know Damon, so if you... Hi Damon, great. Do you mind coming down, Damon, and we'll crack on. We possibly have a few moments of questions afterwards, but hold on to some of those thoughts, note them down, and we can continue that conversation. Thanks very much. So, the Met Police is going to blitz us now with statistics, is that right? No,
absolutely not.
Fantastic, fantastic.
Firstly, thanks for the invite. Really pleased to be here today. I am from London. I'm one of those rare breeds of cops from London. So if I was starting out my career again today, I think Sir Bernard would employ me, which is a start. Where do I come from in terms of my sort of attitude around gangs? Well, as a senior investigating officer in predominantly South London over a number of years, and with a background overall in homicide, I saw firsthand some of the disastrous consequences following gang murders. The likes of Stephen Agunra and Peckham, David Aduru, who was 5 years ago, I think was the youngest knife victim in London at the age of 14. And I lived through very intimately with the families the consequences of those murders. So I have a great passion as a Londoner and as a former SIO in homicide investigation in trying to reduce and improve the situation and the outcomes for people who either are about to enter or who are involved in gang crime. So that's my position. Okay, so this is our mission statement in terms of reference to tackle gang criminality in London by effective enforcement, suppression and proactive policing, working with partners to prevent offending and build safer communities. Well, that's the blurb. I was really interested in the challenge that was put out around information sharing. I put my hands up saying we don't need legislation. I was also interested that the issue was raised around the success of information sharing in terms of police and prisons. I don't know if Graham Hawkins is around today. Is he here today? No. I sat down with Graham Hawkins following a talk I gave to the governing governors meeting to prison governors in London, and we struck up a plan to just get on and do it. And sometimes I think you just have to do that and then look at the legislation that might support it. Having worked in child abuse previously, if you with the best will in the world and an honest view share information, you will never be criticised. You'll surely be criticised if you don't share information and someone dies as a consequence. And that really is my bottom line on it. So, think very carefully outside of the box if you come up across a dilemma around sharing information, and look at the potential outcome or impact of your dilemma and where you should be going with that. Next slide, please. So this is the history and the evolution of Trident. Many of you will know this. Late 90s, within the black community in London, a horrible amount of homicides, very high-profile homicides, sometimes involving female partners being murdered with the use of firearms. Very much with community support from the black community in London, Operation Trident was launched, and then at that time it was predominantly or exclusively a homicide investigation response to those murders. Operation Trafalgar started looking at non-fatal shootings within London, then merged within Trident in 2008. So effectively at that point we became the focal point for shootings, prevention and investigation, whether non-fatal or fatal. And then just over 2 years ago, you've already heard some of this history, the Trident Gang Crime Command was launched, and I was there with Boris and other people in Trafalgar Square on a very cold day, 2.5 years ago. And at that point, I was appointed as head of intelligence. Now, the Met's got a horrible habit of promoting people into roles where they've got no experience, and I've never worked in intelligence before, so they made me head of intelligence. That's now been subsumed or consumed within a wider Met Intel piece. They've centralised Intel now within, so they took that away from me. So I now manage proactive and reactive investigations within South London. And at that point, well, in 2013, we lost the homicide investigation piece, again, predominantly around cost savings, so that moved to the homicide command, but we still, I assure you, maintain very close links with our partners within the homicide teams to support intelligence. So that's the map showing the 18 EGYV boroughs in London. And again, people have already alluded to this. You can look at that map and say, well, that's all well and good. Actually, that doesn't tell you an awful lot because they operate beyond boundaries. And I'll push a challenge out. Is there anyone here from the National Crime Agency? No? Okay. Interestingly, I was at the launch of the organised crime strategy, however many months ago that was, and they talked about the definition of organised crime being groups that secure power and greed. And if you read the strategy that supports their launch, there's nothing in that strategy that talks about the harm or violence that is used to secure that power and greed. Now, colleagues in the Home Office, I throw that out as a challenge because I see that as a gap in that particular strategy. My question would be, in terms of county lines, where did the NCA come to the table in terms of supporting organised crime and where gangs sort of permeate into the organised crime angle? Just a challenge there. So this is a trident approach. We deal with gangs, obviously, at street level, urban gangs, urban street gangs, right the way through to organised crime, organised criminal networks. Interestingly, for those who've heard one of my former bosses talk, Mark Rowley, he talks about those in the Venn diagram, so those that are transiting from urban street gangs through to the organised criminal networks. And again, that question comes back, what are we doing about those individuals who transgress boundaries, not just in Essex, Surrey, Kent, but we've got them dealing drugs down in Devon and Cornwall, Edinburgh, and also on occasions internationally. Yeah. That's just the structure, the local policing model structure, and basically Trident. We cover those 4 regions. We can move that one on. This has already been put up. These are all the EGYV sort of designated zones within the UK. And again, as alluded to before, is that 10 minutes left? Oh, good. As alluded to before, it's not just about policing, it's about a whole gambit of services that support our communities. Health, education, local government, employment and the criminal justice system. And as we've already spoken about, it's absolutely critical that we work, we break down those personal and those organisational boundaries to work together to support the EGYV strategy and aims. These are some of the EGYV priorities for 2013-14. Partnership working and information sharing, youth violence and health, criminal justice response, women, girls and gangs, again these have already been spoken about. Understanding what works, so looking at best practice and learning. Prevention routes out of violent lifestyles, and understanding and responding to the links with organised crime. And again, that's part of my challenge there around the organised crime strategy. One of the tools that we use to target some of our gang members, we utilise what they call judicial restrictions. That's it. I almost lost it there. Judicial restrictions as an opportunity to suppress gang activity and to place restrictions upon what they can and can't do. And often they may well be geographic. There are other opportunities as well as ASBOs, which are gang injunctions. Again, already spoken about earlier on. Major challenge in London with gang injunctions, but we're trying to push that forward. And in terms of that partnership working, again, I was part of setting up sort of a very operational a focus with the probation service around information sharing, so that when some of our gang members leave prison, there is a concerted effort of join up in terms of us sharing intelligence with probation and vice versa, so we understand what the risks are, so that we have effective controls or licence conditions placed upon those individuals. And you know, it might seem simple, but some years ago that wasn't happening. People are released from prison, they go back to their old haunts, and all of a sudden we're back in the cycle of reoffending. Simple measure, but we don't expect. Prisons, again, that's already been spoken about. Again, you know, predominantly because of the very open and forward-thinking attitude of Graham Hawkins, we tried and have done some groundbreaking and some terrific work with Graham. And it's effectively about taking our gang operating model that we use in terms of enforcement out in the streets into the prison. So that, you know, what I mean by that is you lock someone up for violent offences, often they will go into prison and they will continue that violent behaviour. As effective as you are at banging up gang members, all you're doing effectively is moving that problem into the prison estate, so you need to manage it within the prison estate. And the other issue attached to that is if you tell someone that their violence is unacceptable within the community, it's also unacceptable if they start assaulting the previous violent offences and they start assaulting people within prison, often prison governors, prison officers. And what was previously happening was they were getting 7 days on top of the sentence. Well, now what happens is there are proper investigations within the prison. If necessary, we will charge them, and they will go to court, and they will be charged with criminal offences, and that can only be right. But in addition to that, we're not just using enforcement measures, but we are using prevention measures and diversion measures. So job fairs, sitting down and with gang members, offering the opportunities to divert from gang crime. So we're not just engaged in enforcement, it's partnership, diversion, working with partners, that joined up approach to try and do whatever we can to divert somebody from gang crime and reoffending. Again, I don't want to steal the thunder from any of these agencies, because I know a number of them are here and will be participating. But again, sort of working joined up as we do and as we are, these are some of the partners that we are very grateful to be working with, who bring so much expertise and passion to the table from their particular organisations. In terms of, I won't go into loads of detail around stats, but just to give you a few stats, as of 1st of September, so almost bang up to date, there are currently 3,600 nominals on the Trident Gangs matrix. 1,300 of those are either in custody or subject to a judicial restriction. In terms of red nominals, so we risk score them as red, amber, green, so obviously red being the most harmful. There are 185 red nominals in total from that list of 3,500. 92 of those are in custody and 25 are on a judicial restriction. So what we're seeking to do at all stages, and it's really difficult with the volume piece, but is to critically analyse the intelligence, manage the risk around those individuals, and mitigate or reduce or remove the risk where we can. Sometimes very challenging, but and it's by no means the best system in the world, our matrix, but it's what we've got and what we're working to, and it seems to work. I think looking ahead, some of the challenges, obviously we live in a very sort of fiscally challenging environment, if I can put it that way. The Met, like many organisations, in fact more so than a lot of organisations, have to save a significant amount of money. So I think the challenges ahead are actually linking to a benefit, because I think the more fiscal challenges you have, the more creative you can be around those opportunities to collaborate. Because by collaborating, you'll be more efficient. Again, a bit of a challenge out there, but that's what I see as a major challenge moving forward. Despite what's been spoken about, yes, Trident in terms of enforcement has been a success, absolutely. But we're not complacent. We're very much open to the challenges ahead. Lots going on. One of the other challenges is Operation Shield. which is Professor David Kennedy, looking at gang callings. Again, not an exact science. You know, people will tailor it to their own methods potentially, and you know, not everything that works out stateside works here. So we just have to look at that and see where we go. But that's a quick run through about Trident, who we are, where we are, and where we'd like to go.
Right, David, thanks. Just a moment there. We've got about 2 minutes for a question or two. Is anyone got a question? I mean, one of the things that strikes me, having listened to all 3 people this morning, is that there's a lot of overlap. And that overlap can't be by accident. It must be because we're all actually talking to each other, which means that actually things are changing in terms of the interplay between the different agencies. Here's a question though, because it was a question I raised with regard to our first speaker. That is, you've been very successful. Talk about the nominals and raise the number in custody. The more successful you are at policing, the irony is, the more disorder there appears to be on the streets. Is that a fair characterisation in terms of the numbers of others who come into play to want to take the nominal's place, so to speak? How do you balance that?
That's a really difficult question. That's why you're a journalist. Yeah, the nominals I'm speaking about, they don't come off the matrix when they go into prison. So they are still risk managed. In fact, they go into a holding pattern as such when they go into prison. That's the piece of work we're looking at. Is it new people coming in, or where do we stand with that? And some of the challenges moving forward, there has been an increase in knife crime in the last 12 months. Not, I have to say, directly all attributable to gang crime. Some of it's due to nighttime economy and linked to domestic violence, but we are looking at a night crime strategy as we speak at the moment, moving forward to try and address those issues.
Oh, it's a very fluid situation. Anybody else have a question? Yes. Yeah, take 2 questions before we go for some coffee. Lady here and then gentleman there with the hand.
I guess I have a question for both Damien and Marie. My area of research is, I'm Edna Matthews from Middlesex University. I'm a criminologist and my area of research is around child sexual exploitation and child abuse. Right. And you both touched on it, and it seems to me that it's a massive problem within gangs. But one of the issues that seems to come forward is that victims, they're either fascinated by the gang culture, the gang mentality and behaviour, or they don't see themselves as as victims. And the quote that was shown before about I'm loved and therefore I'm accepting to be raped type of thing, it seems to be a problem. I wonder what is the Mayor Office thinking of doing, and what is your strategy, and what is the Metropolitan Police doing in terms of preventing this problem?
Okay, well, I mean, it's not directly my area of expertise, but what I can say is I know there's a report that's recently been published. There has been a report recently published by Andy. I don't know if you can help me. Who's the lady?
We can't hear the question from back here, so...
Oh, right. The question was around what the MPS and the Mayor's Office are doing around child sexual exploitation. There was a report recently published by that lady who worked with the MPS. I can't think of her name now. Barling, yeah. So we're looking at that and some of her research to help drive how we approach that. What I can say is, I'll stand here and I'll be honest with you now, I don't think the MPS response in terms of safeguarding is as good as it should be in terms of gangs. I think there are other forces within the UK that have, Greater Manchester being one of them, who have a very good safeguarding focus to gang crime, so that the early stages where there is an inkling that they're involved in gang crime, they hit the radar of the safeguarding, so that there are referrals in, and parents are being held to account much more earlier around the fact that their 14-year-old son has been stopped twice, at 1 o'clock in the morning with 2 or 3 other gang members.
I think Jenny wanted to come in. So if you've got a mic, there, we'll give it to Jenny to respond to that particular question too. Thanks.
Thanks, Ed.
You go ahead.
Okay, I just wanted to say that we're currently working with the Metropolitan Police around developing a problem profile for local partners to use around gang-associated women and girls. So, as you'll know, kind of current issues are that different agencies will have different pieces of information about different vulnerable young women, but that information isn't always brought together. So that's, we're working with Tim Champion and one of your analysts and a couple of the boroughs to see if we can actually develop that. And that means getting information from non-police sort of council and other agencies, youth offending services, ideally from schools, ideally from the voluntary sector, and so that you've got as much of a comprehensive picture as possible in the local area of who is vulnerable. So that's what we're kind of doing with the Met. It's not, it's quite a challenge, but that's kind of key work.
Let's have a second question before we get back. Well, I know there are other people want questions, but let's take a second question just to keep the flow going, and then we'll get out for some coffee and ask some more questions and interact out there perhaps. Sir.
Hi Damien, thank you for your informative presentation. I want to know do you have the stats for how many murders take place in total in London?
Okay, I have to say that the trend in terms of homicides has come down dramatically in the last 10 years. That's a trend that has pervaded throughout, well, in many major cities across the world. In terms of, I think it was not last year, the year before, we had the lowest homicide rate in 40 years in London, which was 99 homicides. And of those 99 homicides, I think it was only 2 that were gun-enabled, which actually is a fantastic statistic when you look at some of the homicide rates elsewhere in the world. And despite the fact that we're here talking about gang crime, actually London, you know, I'm not just saying this as part of the Met blurb, I mean London is a relatively safe place to live. That being said, you know, there are some areas in London which are very dangerous places, you know, to visit. But in general terms, London, thankfully, is very safe.
And out of that 99, how many of them were gang-related murders? Not gun-enabled, but gang-related.
I haven't got those statistics. I could establish those for you.
Okay, I would appreciate that. Thank you.
Let's get some coffee because we've run over slightly this morning. Can I ask that you said 20 minutes, but can we take 15 minutes, please? That means being back here at 10 to 12 because we have some great speakers after that. The coffee is on the mezzanine floor where you gathered this morning for registration. It's one for thanks.
It's not necessarily about like a gang member going out and like finding a stranger right here. It's more about gang affiliated women who often don't realize that is rape, they're coerced, sexual. It's happening in London. Quite
And what interests me is, well, we don't need that. We don't.
That's very different.
Jenny, lovely to see you. When you this was coming up, it was only 20 quid. And if you want the honest truth, I want to get out of the office. A bit fed up being in the house the week.
You know what, it's good to get out of the office. And you know, it's between where they get their girls from. So actually going
I think there's a lot more boy on boy kind of getting at someone, whereas I think what I've noticed in London is if you want to get at another gang member, like race is being used more as a punishment here.
Yeah, but there are some people that wear it like, they don't necessarily see it as rape either. That's the other thing. When we speak to the boys involved in these practices, a lot of them have like liners, so the group sex stuff that's going on, they don't see it as rape, they don't understand it.
I missed you on the way in.
And they also see the
I'm
girls
sorry,
in
I'm
different
late.
ways.
How are you?
So you can rape those girls, but you can't rape those
I kind of walked in and went,
it's bad, so they have different like standards of girls where they do sexual
Make sure my doors.
But the way it's interesting, we actually look at like, because you're right in terms of like the being seen as a rapist. Gang members don't want to be seen as rapists
Or a sex
offender. So that's one of the things that when we talk to people, making them understand actually you will go to prison as a sex offender if you're involved in these things, and you will always be a sex offender. And making them aware of that, and hopefully that kind of like prevents them getting involved in some of this stuff as well. It's very much about awareness.
Actually, I was late to your meeting that one time.
Yes, I'll grab it.
Well, I thought it was interesting that I had all the
colleague was saying, because I mean,
that was amazing, and every single person recognised it.
we're hearing
They're all in the audience.
actually when you look on YouTube. Hi, Jenny. When you look at
Twilight? Hi. I like that.
are you bonding?
I don't
as
know.
American?
There you go. There's like, you're more than welcome to come in and sit on and ask questions.
Yes, I know mine. I'm fun.
And then I'm just overhearing what you're saying. Hi, I'm Jenny. Hi. Yeah, so we often invite Nick to our meeting, and you've been to our meetings, and Alan. Yeah. So it's interesting what you're saying about young people don't want to be associated with sex offenders because what we're hearing is things like there's more YouTube kind of posturing, so less of the stuff that is essentially here I am being violent and you use this as evidence in court, but actually lots more stuff around sexual violence and acceptance of that, normalisation of that. And I'm sure you're aware that part of the process you see in the security state where before it was like you didn't want to be that, but now actually
what I see, it's more of a secret, insidious, creeping in kind of thing. Like they might have girls giving oral sex like in a line, but that is not rape to them because this is just what she does. She's willing to do it, actually framed by the law that consent here. That's not consent, that's still she's being raped or they don't sit like a baby.
So if they're all doing it together, they don't see themselves like that.
Right.
So that's the difference.
And also they deny what they're doing is rape.
Yes, they don't understand that it's rape.
In terms of consent and
So
grey areas and...
In our sessions, obviously, we have like a lot of disclosures of rape and multi-perpetrator rape, but we also
in male and female sessions?
Yes. Mostly females that disclose.
But we have had male gang members also come forward and say that they've been sexually abused and also that they've been involved in gang rapes themselves. So that's an issue for us, and that's an issue for the schools as well. What do we do with that? Because often what the schools will do, they will take the victims out of the school, they'll move the victims, but they keep the offenders in the school.
And occasionally they'll keep them all in the school and just change their schedules around, so it's almost like they're punishing the girl for, you know, whatever. So we were at a school where girls were doing sexual favors in the toilets because a gang was making them do it for money and taking, you know, they're pimping these girls out in the toilet.
And that's unusual, I hope, or is that
not that unusual? There's a massive sexual violence problem in the schools in London. It's a big issue, but obviously for the schools, they don't want to come out and say, this is happening at school. They don't want to know. And sometimes they might not know, and also sometimes the teachers don't understand what consent is. That's the biggest issue.
And they cry in the session.
Yeah, they get really upset.
The teachers cry in the session, which is really unhelpful to the kids.
Then it's like, how can I go?
Leave then if you're gonna cry. But yeah, come watch us talk. We're on at 3 today.
I'd love to as well, actually.
Yes, if you want to.
And we're gonna do some. We're doing some exercises as well from the girls' session. So some stuff we actually do with the kids we'll be doing later today. And you can be the students. Anyway, I gotta get coffee, or I'm gonna fall asleep.
That's just kind of like one part of what we're doing. So we run
You're
from
doing
year 6 all the way to
great.
year 10. So obviously we go all the way through recruitment, all of that sort of stuff, online stuff as well. We have a big anti-social media session which looks at YouTube videos, dangers of being, dangers of that sort of stuff, like blackmail, victimisation.
Okay. That's brilliant.
Yeah, let me know if you want any information.
Let's get coffee.
Hi, Twilight.
How is the home office doing?
Yeah, the office is doing well.
I was interested
Hi.
to hear.
Yes, I did put myself forward to be one of the peer reviewers.
Okay.
That clash with the organization I was working for at that time and what the home office wanted. But I'm free of that now, but I'm very interested in where the home office is going with this.
Okay.
Because I've been on the ground in London, been looking at this issue since '94.
Okay.
And so I'm very interested in when we move away from looking at symptoms to actually dealing with underlying multi-systemic, multi-generational issues that help to create the violence that has now grown into a point where people are doing it. It's always been there. And so me and the organization that I work with, those are the kind of interventions that we put in place. So we go in and look at transforming whole communities and not just defend it, because the environment is toxic.
Sure.
You can do work with them.
Do you have a card? Because we have an expression of interest out at the moment, and I can get that sent to you for our peer review network. If I had a card, I would give it to you, but I've done that for years. I need to get my ex to you. Okay. Right, we'll do that.
But in terms of answering the question Twyla's asked, what is the plan? Are you going to revisit areas that you've already visited to see where things have moved on to, or are you still looking to extend to other areas?
We're extending to 10 areas. I'm out of time at that point. But we are working with our existing areas, and we're saying we'd like to come back, see how you're doing, see what your further issues are. So after the kind of general peer review program, peer one, last year, in year 1 last year, we did things like deep dives in issues. So Enfield had a deep dive on health issues. You know, the kind of Lewisham and other areas doing much more in-depth work with them around county lines. So we're now kind of, from going to a kind of the whole basics and what the kind of overall issues, we're focusing down on particular local issues with the existing areas. So that programme is ongoing. We run as an annually funded programme. So what will happen next year?
Oh, really? Did you not get in? Sorry.
legislation, review, and that's the same for everybody. But we have, again, a point I was going to make, you know, we have a ministerial group, the Home Secretary personally chairs that and prioritises that. We have like any Dr. Smith very much behind us in terms of getting Job Centre Plus on board. So there's a, you know, genuine high level political leadership. So it's very interesting. Yes, yes.
If you get a chance, I know you're very busy, but if you remember my name.
Oh, I was going to ask you, sorry, I'll look at my BlackBerry and see if I can stay for the next urgent come up. But I was going to ask you why you thought we needed legislation.
Probably because I still think it would be the stick that would actually make it work. Not that I'm saying it. So I think there is, I totally agree with everyone who votes the other way. I do think it would help further because there's still individuals who claim that there is no justification.
And the thing is, what do you change in legislation? So we've looked at what do you actually do to